This is a story all about how the Mafia controlled Russia for a period in time. Y'all know of Russia. It's this big ass country located here, and throughout history Russia is known as this big bad guy out to get Europe and the US. But even though there was always a rivalry between the West and Russia, the Western world wasn't actually Russia's greatest threat. It was actually the Mafia. Then Nick, you might ask me, how is that even the case? Well, picture this. The year is 1917. Russians have had enough of the bitch-ass king and his scamp wife, so they decided that some German dude's book had an ideal way of running their country. So they killed the king and installed a new thing called communism. In this new way of running the government, everyone is equal, and sharing is caring. But some people are more equal than others. And those others were the people who didn't believe that everything they created or produced should be owned by the entire goddamn country. So those more equal than them decided to put them in happy fun camps known as gulags, where you could do fun activities such as mining rocks for 14 hours a day, barely getting fed, and mining some more rocks. Yay! So during this period, the dudes that got sent there, now labeled as enemies of the state, decided to form their own set of rules, known as the Thieves' Code, since the one that the government imposed on them got them into this mess in the first place wasn't really working. Now, the Thieves' Code essentially said, fuck the government, and fuck whoever cooperates with the government. So then in 1945, when Hitler's world tour started, Stalin, then the dictator of Russia, decreed that if any gulag prisoners were to fight in the war, they would gain amnesty of the crimes they committed to end up in there in the first place. And this divided the prisoners. On the one hand, there was the group that wanted to fight and gain their freedom because anything is better than spending the rest of your life in Siberia breaking rocks, and then there was the other group that didn't want to fight in the war and actually obey the Thieves' Code. Thus, those guys got labeled as sukas, aka bitches. And that led to a thing known as the Bitch Wars. You can't make this shit up. Which was essentially a Russian prison gang war where many lost their lives due to being proclaimed as bitches. And these wars lasted 8 years. 8 goddamn years over one group calling the other group a bitch. Anyways, Stalin kicked the bucket around 1953 and the bitch wars ended, as around 8 million prisoners got released from the gulags. And now you had a bunch of hardened criminals released into a new ecosystem. And these weren't your regular gangbangers. No. These were now mobsters that survived 8 years of continuous prison war, and they adopted an everyone for themselves mentality, and decided to ditch the code. So these dudes started running the black market. Drugs, alcohol, blue jeans, and western goods were all being sold. And all were being done so to make a profit. And while doing so, the newly born mob started bribing government officials and even themselves entering the government as to keep their operations running smoothly. And they were so successful at running the black market and keeping them out of harm's way that they controlled 2/3 of the USSR's economy. 2 goddamn thirds of all economic activity was being done illegally and by the Russian Mafia. The USSR's GDP in 1989 was $2.5 billion. 1.65 billion would have been generated just by the Mafia. Then Gorbachev took power in the 80s, and this lad decided to loosen restrictions on private businesses. So now a lot of Mafia businesses were allowed to be legal and operate normally, more or less. In this time period as well, the US immigration policies got a bit lax as well, and a decent amount of Russian Jews immigrated there. And along with them came the mob. Some of the first mob businesses were in New York, and they were selling rubles for cheap. But when people would buy them, instead of getting rubles, they'd receive a sack filled with potatoes, which, to be honest, is bloody hilarious. And the cunts doing this were named the Potato Bag Gang. Later on, more serious mobsters popped up, such as Evsei Agron, also known as the Russian Godfather. He got his nickname due to the tremendous cruelty he exhibited towards his rivals, killing and torturing them in numerous ways. And in what business did he have rivals? Drugs? Alcohol? Prostitution? None of that. He was providing New Jersey with tax-free heating oil as diesel fuel. So in the 90s, the USSR collapsed and the free market economy was implemented onto Russia and all the other non-important states that composed the USSR. Of course, the Mafia saw this as a new frontier. Many ex-KGB agents decided to join mobsters and provide their skills as they took over these new countries and continued their illegal activities there. Now, gangster summit meetings were taking place fairly often in hotels and restaurants, where the Mafia would discuss their next move. And at one of those summits, it was decided that a young fellow by the name of Vyacheslav Kirillovich Ivankov was to be exiled into the US because the mad lad was killing too many people in Russia and bringing unwanted attention that even the corrupt government officials couldn't cover up. And within a year of Vyacheslav living in America, he created an empire of drug trafficking, money laundering, and prostitution rings, as well as trading ties with the American Mafia and the Colombian cartel. In one instance, Ivankov attempted to buy out Georgian boss Valery Glugech's drug importation business. When the latter refused the offer, he and his top associates were shot dead. Basically, you were either with him or against him. Ivankov's reign also ended in June 1995 when a 3.5 million extortion attempt on two Russian businessmen ended in the FBI knocking down his door and him being sentenced to a 10-year maximum security prison sentence. 2000s, the golden days of the Russian Mafia were gone, as a lot of the mob bosses got either jailed or killed, and a new wave of smaller Mafia rings popped up and are still operating within Russia and other parts of the world. Unfortunately, a lot of people still believe that the mob still has some ties within the Russian government, but a lot of that is speculation, as you can't really go up and ask some politician whether or not he's in the goddamn Mafia, because 99.99% of the time his answer is gonna be, of course not. Who the hell are you to ask me this question? Security! Anyways, I hope you learned something useless today that you won't be able to use anywhere else other than as a conversation starter with your awkward Tinder date. My name is Nick, and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.